This landed less than a day ago, and it changes how every single penalty against Lewis Hamilton this season needs to be read. Not because a new decision came down, because something old just got exposed. In this video, you'll understand exactly why Fred Vasseur looked genuinely stunned in front of the media, and why the phrase he used, small stone after small stone, was never really about frustration. It was a warning. Keep that phrase in mind. It comes back. Start with the order of events, because the order is the whole story. Earlier this season at Monaco, Formula One's own timing barriers at pit entry were physically modified. The measurement line moved by 77 centimeters. Nobody flagged it publicly at the time. Race weekends kept happening. Penalties kept getting issued one after another, against Hamilton specifically, based on timing and speed data drawn from systems nobody thought to question. Silverstone came first, his home race, and instead of a celebration, he left with 2 marks against his name in a single weekend. Then Spa, then Hungary, where a pit lane infraction was measured at 1/10 of a kilometer per hour over the limit. Only after all of that, buried inside a technical report almost nobody read, did the Monaco discrepancy surface. And once it did, engineers and journalists went back and asked the question that should have been asked from the start. If the line measuring speed was never where it was supposed to be, how many of these penalties were ever real? If you want the stories the paddock doesn't put in the press releases, subscribe right now and drop a comment telling me which country you're watching from, because the next part hits different depending on where you sit in this argument. This is not paddock gossip. This is not a rival engineer briefing a journalist off the record. This is the team principal of Ferrari, a man who has spent this entire season publicly accepting decision after decision without complaint, finally breaking that pattern in front of cameras. Go back to Silverstone first. The stewards gave Hamilton a 5-second penalty for allegedly moving before the lights went out. Ferrari's own sensors recorded nothing, 0 movement. The only thing the stewards found after going back to onboard footage was a rotation of the tire measuring 42 millimeters, less than the width of a hand. Vasseur was asked directly if this was a mistake by his driver. He didn't soften it. "You are a bit harsh," he told the media, and then he went further, explaining that the sensors said the car never moved, even if a camera could technically pick out a dot shifting by a fraction of an inch. So ask it plainly. Did the car move, according to the team that builds and monitors it? No. Did the stewards still penalize the driver? Yes. Was the evidence for that penalty a measurement 42 millimeters wide? Yes. Is that a standard any engineer would call reliable? Not according to the men who read that data for a living. Same day, same race weekend, Hamilton was penalized again, this time for failing to slow for a yellow flag at turn 9. The warning that should have appeared on his steering wheel display did not appear when he entered the zone. It appeared late. The stewards ruled that once it did show up, he hadn't slowed enough. 2 penalties, 1 race, and in both cases the equipment meant to justify the punishment either detected nothing or delivered its warning after the moment it mattered. Article by article, this is the kind of inconsistency regulation exists to prevent, and in both cases, the equipment failed first. Now put Monaco next to Hungary, and read them with the same flat tone, because that's the only way the pattern becomes visible instead of just felt. In Hungary, Ferrari's own telemetry showed Hamilton doing 80.6 kilometers per hour in an 80 kilometer per hour zone. The FIA's data said 80.5. The gap between what actually happened and what the limit allowed was a number so small, it barely exists on a stopwatch. And Vasseur accepted the penalty anyway, saying that when a weekend is already going wrong, 1/10 of a kilometer per hour becomes a big number. Now read that sentence again next to what came out about Monaco. A measurement line that had physically moved by 77 centimeters, undetected for months. Neither fact alone proves anything about Hungary specifically, but side by side, they raise a question nobody in the paddock can honestly wave away. If a barrier moved once without anyone noticing, what confidence does anyone actually have that every other line, every other reading, every other 1/10 of a kilometer per hour this season was measured from the right spot? And if you're not subscribed yet, this is exactly the kind of story you'll want to be here for the next time it happens. Because it will. Here's what the numbers mean in real terms. Because 5 seconds and 1/10 of a kilometer per hour sound small until you turn them into positions. Hamilton served that 5-second penalty standing still before a mechanic had touched the car. Take those 5 seconds back and his gap to the podium at Silverstone shrinks to something that changes where he crosses the line. Not just how the stopwatch reads it. Now widen that out across 6 separate incidents under review this season, and the picture stops being about one unlucky weekend. It becomes about a championship where Hamilton currently sits 50 points behind Kimi Antonelli. 50 points sounds like an unbridgeable gap. Remove even 2 or 3 of these penalties, recalculate the positions he'd have held without them, and that gap is still real, but it stops being the wall it currently looks like. Go back further, because Vasseur said something months before any of this Monaco detail came out that now reads very differently. Speaking after the false start penalty, before anyone outside the team had heard the words timing line discrepancy, he described the pressure building on his driver as small stone after small stone. At the time, it sounded like a man accepting bad luck with as much grace as he could manage. Knowing what came out about Monaco, it reads like someone who already suspected the stones weren't falling by accident. This isn't really about one driver's misfortune. It's about what happens when stewarding leans harder every season on sensors, timing lines, and millimeter-level measurements without the same level of scrutiny applied to the equipment itself. A panel of stewards rotates race to race. Regulations get adjusted mid-season, and underneath all of it sits a physical timing infrastructure that, at least once this year, was moved by 77 centimeters, without anyone catching it before the fact. When the tool measuring the offense hasn't been checked as carefully as the offense itself, the problem stops being about any single driver and starts being about the standard applied to everyone on the grid. To be fair to the other side of this argument, there's a version of this that holds up on its own. Margins in modern Formula 1 have always been tight, and if the limit is 80 kilometers per hour, 80.1 is technically over it, no matter how small that feels standing trackside. Rules exist precisely, so nobody gets to argue their way out of a number. That's a defensible position. It's also not the one that survives sitting next to a timing line that was proven wrong once already. What comes next is the part nobody in the paddock wanted written down. Before I give it to you, subscribe, because this story has a second half, and it lands in the next few days. Would this have been penalized at all if the equipment measuring it had been double-checked before the season started? Nothing in the written reasoning says it would have been caught either way. That's not proven, and I'm not going to pretend it is. It's simply a question anyone watching this is entitled to ask out loud. Here's the verdict. This was never really a story about Lewis Hamilton having a difficult year. It's a story about a governing body that leaned on measurement systems accurate to fractions of a second and fractions of a centimeter, without applying the same precision to checking the systems themselves. Vasseur spent most of this season accepting penalties one at a time, calmly, in public. The moment he saw 6 of them laid out together, next to a timing line that had physically moved without anyone noticing, the calm disappeared. That's not a man making excuses for his driver. That's a man who just watched a season's worth of decisions get put next to each other for the first time. And here's what's still genuinely open. Nobody has confirmed yet whether any of the other 5 penalties trace back to the same kind of measurement error found at Monaco. Nobody has said whether the FIA plans to review them. That's not a gap in this video, that's a gap in what's actually known right now, and pretending otherwise would be worse than saying nothing at all. So tell me, if flawed timing equipment genuinely cost a driver championship points this season, does the FIA owe him a review? Or does a penalty stand no matter what comes out afterward once the weekend is over? Predict it in the comments because the answer is coming. Zandvoort is next on the calendar, and it's the first race since this timing line detail became public. Whatever the FIA says or doesn't say, before those cars turn a wheel, they will tell you everything about whether this was a one-time fix or the start of a much longer argument about who gets to trust the numbers on the screen. Subscribe now, because the moment they respond, whether they explain it, ignore it, or quietly correct the record, I'm covering it before anyone else does. Like this video if you think this deserves more attention than it's gotten so far. Tell me in the comments who you think should be answering for this. And until the next one.